Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sit Heads Meditation Club. My name is John. I help organize this group. Sit Heads is a sitting and social group for people interested in deep meditation practice. I like to call us a serious meditation group for non-serious people. And if you want to hang out with us, you can find us at sit-heads.com. Now it would be my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce to you Mark Nunberg. Mark, I'm going to bring you up if that's okay. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good to see you, John, and good to see everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Oh, uh-oh. I can't hear you. Hang
Okay.
tight for 1 second. All right. Take two. Hi, Mark. How are you? It's nice to see
Nice to
you.
see you, John.
Good to be back here with you. So, for folks probably won't know this, but just as a little background for my connection with Mark, he was one of my retreat teachers for a month-long retreat that I did at the Forest Refuge. That was how I met Mark, and I came away awed and grateful for his skills as a teacher and for his general presence and ability to hold my practice, even when my practice was going kind of bananas. So I appreciated that. It's good to see you, Mark. Is it okay if I do a quick third person introduction for you?
Sure.
All right. So Mark Nunberg has been practicing meditation since 1982, teaching since 1990. He is a co-founder of Common Ground Meditation Center in Minneapolis. He has studied with both Asian and Western teachers. He practiced as a monk for 5 months in Burma. That was in a Mahasi tradition, Mark? Is that right?
Yeah.
And I understand that Mark is also has been profoundly influenced by the teachings of the Burmese master Sayadaw U Tejaniya as well. Um, he's done 4 3-month retreats at the Insight Meditation Society Retreat Center, as well as many more months of retreat at IMS's Forest Refuge, which is again where I met Mark, where he was serving as a teacher. So that's Mark Nunberg. Here he is, folks. Mark, welcome. I'm really glad to be here with you.
Yeah, nice to be here too with everyone.
So I'd love to just start with us having a conversation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Does that sound all right?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Um, so I there were a few things that you well, actually no, let me not go there. Let me start with this. Can you talk a little bit about, as someone who's trained in both Mahasi style Vipassana and Sayadaw U Tejaniya's style, I'm always interested in a sort of comparison and contrasting between the two. I think there's the idea of someone who did a ton of Mahasi practice and then fell in love with the U Tejaniya approach is, I think, an increasingly common origin story for a lot of meditators. And I'm curious, first, how would you describe the difference between Sayadaw U Tejaniya's approach and the approach that you see in the more traditional branches of the Mahasi lineage that you might get from a Joseph Goldstein or a Sayadaw U Pandita? I know those would all be different, but they're, I think, at least of a piece in some way, right? How would you see them as differing?
Yeah, well, it's, it takes a little bit of nuance because even within people who say or just naturally are teaching out of the Mahasi tradition, there's quite a bit of diversity. And, even among Burmese monks in the Mahasi tradition, different monks and the way they teach, have different reputations. This monk has a lot of metta in how they teach, or this monk, is really fierce in this way or that way.
Yeah.
So, and also just people who've been deeply influenced by Sayadaw U Tejaniya, there's a lot of diversity even within that. So that's just the
Hmm.
general context. And of course, the other thing we need to remember when we're talking about these things, because it's a useful question, but we want to remember that the way our minds are conditioned is kind of wanting to categorize uh, and organize things as, okay, this is this and this is that. And it
Yeah.
sort of, we lose a little bit of the, yeah, I guess it sort of depends too. Like my mind likes to see the connections. So I don't see them as differently as probably most people would, the Mahasi tradition and the style of that Sayadaw U Tejaniya teaches. And you have
Yeah.
to remember his teacher, Sayadaw U Tejaniya's teacher, Sui Min, a very famous Sayadaw in Burma. He was one of Mahasi Sayadaw's main disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And the real essence of the Mahasi tradition, I mean, there's a lot of culture, you know, and there's a lot of specificity to like how they do things. It's been regimented, and there's the noting technique where yogis, retreatants are asked to name experience moment by moment by moment and to get quite
Yeah.
fluent with that. I mean, later when there's a lot of momentum, that mental noting or mental labeling, it might be okay to drop it. Generally, in the tradition or in that style, that's a pretty central practice.
Yeah.
But the real essence of, I think, both Sayadaw Tejaniya and the Mahasi tradition is just this, yeah, foundation of the four, using the Satipatthana Sutta, the four foundations of mindfulness. And really, as we understand that sutta more and more, partly through Venerable Analayo's work,
Mm.
um, it's really about understanding how to be aware of mental and physical phenomena. And then the difference between Mahasi Sayadaw tradition and Sayadaw Tejaniya is like, what are the skillful means that are going to help me be
Mm.
aware of mental and physical phenomena with some
Yeah.
continuity? And, like, normally we think of the Sayadaw Tejaniya emphasizing relaxation, and we think about the Mahasi tradition emphasizing persistence and effort. Um, I mentioned already the Mahasi tradition generally emphasizes mental noting or labeling, where
Mm-hmm.
Sayadaw is, in some ways, more interested that the object is being known, and the particular object is less important. You need to be aware of an object in order to know that it's being known in that moment. But whether it's a mental object or a physical object is less important. Importance is there is an object and it's being known.
Mm-hmm.
Both are both traditions are so uh, dedicated about building that continuity, building the momentum, using the whole day. And that way they're very similar.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, so that's a little bit. There's, of course, a lot more to say about the similarities and differences, but hopefully that was helpful.
Extremely, extremely helpful. And I would love to dive in and tease this out a little bit more because, I had an experience where I sort of shifted toward and a sort of Utejaniya approach, but it was so gradual because it was like I was even my Mahasi influence practice, it was becoming I don't know, it was naturally tending more towards a sort of receptivity, um, a sort of, well, phenomena are going to present themselves, whatever they are, and your job is to be there and not be distracted so you can receive them. And I was talking to a colleague of yours, I think, Deborah Helzer, um, who's a sort of proud, you know,
Mahasi
torch
person.
torchbearer for the Mahasi, absolutely. Um, and but I was asking her about this. I was like, is it okay to sort of feel more like, am I right that like my job is mostly to just sort of be present and allow awareness to receive whatever objects present themselves? And like if an object doesn't present itself or isn't noticed, you don't have to sort of go gunning for it. It's just, well, that wasn't, that's what happened. Um, and she said, yeah, like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. And I came to this place of really thinking of my Mahasi practice, like the way I landed was it's and this is I'm not suggesting that this is the correct way. This is just how it felt right for me. It was like, oh, this practice isn't hunting, it's fishing. You're not sort of, you don't need to go out and be like, give me that phenomenon, now that one, then that one. You can sit back and just let your pole be in the water and they'll bite, right? Or they won't. Um, and I feel like that was already really getting pretty close to at least how I've heard U Tejaniya's aspects of it being presented, especially through the writings of Andrea Fella, where I really experience it or at least understand it as being this like receptive awareness. So to me, the line between the two was blurry because I sort of segued between the two without there having been a clear line of demarcation. And it's interesting what you said about the skillful means, like the the noting. U Tejaniya doesn't really use the use noting in the same way. I understand that Sayadaw U Tejaniya puts more emphasis on checking your relationship. That's a thing I hear a lot about Sayadaw U Tejaniya's practice. Could you say more about that? This idea of um, bringing, putting more emphasis on the relationship with phenomena or awareness or the object or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, when we think about Sadhu Tejaniya's instructions, he does make that explicit, but I think it's totally there in the Mahasi. In the
Yeah.
Mahasi tradition, the way it would show up, John, is in the process of acknowledging what is being known as you build momentum. Quite naturally, what's going to stand out in the moment is how the mind is relating. So that will
Hmm.
be noted, that will be noticed or noted.
Yes. Hmm.
So it just naturally arises in the Mahasi tradition. Um, Sayadaw makes it explicit. And
Yeah.
and also I think that's true, just kind of the point you were making, um, that Deborah, who's, like you said, is really solidly teaching, proudly teaching from the Hasi style of practice. Um, there's always going to be, for anybody who's practicing in a wholesome way, a useful way, there's always going to be receptive and assertive aspects to how we're practicing. And so, one
Mm.
thing that we as practitioners want to get clear about over time is like, how, in the way I'm practicing, how am I developing that receptive part of the path? But we
Mm.
also want to ask, how am I developing the assertive part of the path? The reason why we initially emphasize the receptive is just probably culturally and maybe even genetically, we're assertive, and we have
Yeah.
to learn to drop that. But then when we start reasserting the assertive, then it needs to come from wisdom. And generally, the assertive, like Sayadaw Tejaniya would say, the assertive part of practice is interest.
Mm.
Like that sincere interest in understanding the nature of the moment.
Hmm.
And
Right.
Mahasi would put it more in terms of connecting with the object.
Yeah. 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 And my understanding is that there was, I wasn't there for it, of course, but that there was when when Sayadaw U Pandita began teaching, there was that he actually shifted his own teaching approach when he um, came to realize that the need to emphasize persistence and intensity was maybe less with the Westerners that he was teaching, and that was just sort of the result of uh, beginning his sort of teaching in a different culture than the one that he'd been accustomed to. Whereas, for someone like me whose tendency is striving, effort, assertiveness, intensity, um, being explicitly told, hey, settle back, um, is really what I needed, right? I was
Yeah,
like saying, hey, make sure to penetrate the object, got to catch them all. That was giving me more of what I kind of already had too much of already.
yeah.
Um, Yeah. So, but for other people, regardless of what, what part of the world you live in, I'm sure there are plenty of people for whom that more intense uh, style of teaching is the correct prescription for them. I would love to talk a little bit about the nature of, yeah, the nature of effort in practice, and there's something that you told me that I would love to tease out, where you asked me to just be open to what inclines one, or what inclines me toward tension, and what inclines toward ease. I don't know if I'm getting the wording exactly right, but it was like, what makes you feel tense and what conduces to ease, and then try and do less of the one and more of the other. Could you could you say a little bit about that, and
Yeah.
what
Although
you
I
mean by
didn't
that
probably say
instruction?
that last half of what you said. Try to do more of the ease and less of the, because that
Hmm.
happens naturally when there's interest in the squeeze and the release.
Hmm.
And this kind of, I think what you said, John, really does tie together, the initial part about connecting the assertive and the receptive and interest to this question or this comment about our discussion when you were on retreat. Um, because we do need, all of us, we need to develop and refine how we're actually interested. Sometimes I put this in the context of understanding, like we shouldn't presume our heart already knows how to connect with what's predominant. Like when we're
Hmm.
moving away from using a primary meditation object and we're more practicing with whatever's predominant,
Yes.
acknowledging what's predominant. I'm sure all of us have noticed that when we're doing that more open style of practice, there's still this cognitive process trying to cognitively figure out what's predominant.
Hmm.
Like what should I be connecting with in this moment now? What should I be connecting with? And
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of trust that what the heart is naturally interested in will come to the forefront and will do its thing. Interest will
Hmm.
do its thing. And what I think, now we're on the sort of intellectual side of it, but what I think will naturally present itself to all of us practitioners is the heart's natural interest in squeeze and release, tension and
Yeah.
release, right? It's sort of like the Buddhist teachings on the Four Noble Truths. He's basically, I think, saying in those teachings on the Four Noble Truths is, hey, practitioners, your mind is naturally interested in dukkha and its release. And
Hmm.
one of the most profound, provocative things I've read from Ajahn Chah's teachings
Hmm.
is he loved to say, and he said it in so many different ways and different talks, all there is suffering, the arising of suffering, and the ceasing of suffering. So it's like
Hmm.
when we're practicing, we're on retreat or living our life in the city, and we're tracking like we have some respect for being present. What we're really present to is whatever I'm doing, having a conversation with John or making my meal or whatever it might be, what the heart is actually naturally interested in is suffering arising or is suffering ceasing right now.
Hmm.
Are things getting heavy, getting tight, or things releasing, becoming free? So we can all check right now, you know, are things getting tight or things getting free? Because that's always happening, right? Where the heart is either getting bound up slowly, gradually, or fast, or it's becoming unbound.
Hmm.
It's always in motion. And that motion is either towards being bound or towards being unbound. Now, this is subtle stuff. So we do a lot of practice to develop a kind of sensitivity where suffering and the end of suffering finally starts to get clear. Oh, this is what's relevant. It doesn't matter what we're doing. This is always relevant.
Hmm.
So that's what I was pointing you to, John, at that time. is
Yeah.
like uncovering this very natural meditation object. This is the essential meditation object, the ultimate meditation object. Suffering arising and suffering ceasing.
Mm.
It's just
Mm.
subtle. So we need a lot of skillful means to stay in the game.
Yeah. And there's something else subtle about it, I think, besides perceiving it, right? The subtlety of recognizing it. There's, I think, a lot of subtlety involved in being interested in it without turning it the ceasing of suffering into another thing to cling to or grasp after.
Right. But
And
then you'd get immediate feedback, wouldn't you?
you you would
I mean, if
um
you're sensitive enough.
you would, but it's like I often hear the metaphor of the hot coal, right? When you are holding a hot coal, you let go. But the hot coal of suffering, I find myself continuing to hold on to, despite recognizing that it's hot and it's in my hand and it's burning.
Yeah, but let's
And
let's unpack that. Like, why would that be? Do you have some thoughts? Why would we keep holding in a way that's in the direction of more suffering, more squeeze? What is driving that unwholesome, ineffective way of relating in those moments?
so, are you asking me?
Well, I mean, I can give you my thoughts, but
Okay.
yeah.
Um, I mean, so here, I'll put something in front of you, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm slipping into student mode during this interview just because I'm so used to working with you as a teacher. I'll try to make sure that it's all very relevant, or as broadly relevant as I can make it. But this is connected to what we're talking about. Like a realization that I had recently is that, like, I very recently is I had this feeling of I need to give up on uh trying to feel good. And this is something that I've sort of understood intellectually in the past, but that I need to not care so much whether I feel good or I feel bad, right? That's a thing to not worry so much about. It's not terribly important in the long run. And what I realized, like, that's pretty basic Buddhism, right? In a sense, that chasing after pleasure and running away from pain,
Well,
chasing good feeling and running
intellectually,
from
it's
bad
pretty
feeling.
pretty available teaching, but to realize it in a deeper way is profound.
Yeah, and I mean, and the big realization that I had recently is that everything I've been doing, including mindfulness practice, including Vipassana practice, including my efforts to accept feeling bad, they have all been subtly in the hope of feeling good, right? And so this idea of um like the this idea of, what you talk about, what I've heard you say a lot, this unshakable release of the heart, this idea of being unbound. I feel like I keep slipping back into imagining that as some sort of good feeling. And I don't think it is exactly. I think, if anything, it's freedom from needing some kind of good feeling.
Yeah, but wouldn't that
Um,
be a good feeling? I mean,
Well, but this is how
language
I
is
end up in.
limited.
Yeah, it would be a good feeling. But then that just slips me back into being like, oh, I'm trying to get a good feeling, and then when I feel bad, I say, well, something must be wrong.
Yeah.
Um, it's like very subtle, and I understand. I mean, tell me about that. Like, is the unshakable release a species of pleasure? Um, because this is something I've also heard you talk about, where you sort of went to bat for certain types of pleasure. You talked about maybe the whole practice being about
Yeah.
finding your way towards subtle. It's actually coming back to me now,
Yeah.
towards more refined forms of pleasure. So where am I going wrong? Because it has actually, I've been getting a lot of mileage. I've been feeling a lot of freedom from just being like, I don't care if I feel good or feel bad. And when I notice myself starting to care about, oh, I feel bad, better do something, just recognizing that tendency. But that's been helpful to me. But that seems at odds with what I've heard you say, and maybe what you're saying right now about it being kind of a species of good feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to say about that. The first thing, something I've been repeating recently in some talks is this quote from Ajahn Thanissaro's teacher, Ajahn Suwat, great
Okay.
Thai forest master. And there was I won't get it exactly right, but when you realize deep happiness, it won't matter that it isn't personal. And the reason I like to repeat that is there's a real we want to because it's so natural, like you're saying, John, that we human beings are interested in pleasure, right? So let's just work with that because it's so deeply part of what it means to be human, to like pleasure, right? So we don't want to fight that.
Mm.
We want to get interested in that, and really kind of, as much as our life circumstances allow, we want to notice the movement along that spectrum of more pleasure, less pleasure, you know. And what we'll find when we're in the places of more pronounced pleasure, like a lot of joy, a lot of ease, even meditative joy and ease, what starts to stand out if we're interested, and it's not easy to be interested when there's a lot of joy and ease, because it
Mm.
triggers, oh, I'm here. This is where I've wanted to be. So now I don't have to practice. I mean, we don't necessarily recognize that thought, but that's a strongly conditioned reaction when there's a lot of ease. I finally got here. The last thing I need to do is practice because I'm here. But
Right. I
if we
deserve
do,
to enjoy this, right? I
yeah,
deserve to
we
bask in this
indulge
for a
and
bit.
enjoy it. Exactly. Now, if we can stay interested, we'll notice something. I mean, if we're authentically interested, which means we know it's really joyful, we're really right in the middle of the joy and ease, but we're just curious of it as a natural phenomena being known, we'll notice that the not clinging to the joy and ease is even more satisfying than indulging, taking personally the joy and ease. It's like a
Hmm.
natural, so for a heart that's interested in feeling good, it will eventually realize that. And that's the step between, that's where equanimity comes. And in terms of concentration practice, that's the movement from the third jhana to the fourth jhana.
Mm.
Because the third jhana is sort of the peak of a kind of happiness that is opposed to unhappiness, dualistic.
Hmm.
Like this is really the best. But the not clinging, the non dependence on that, that's the piece of the fourth jhana, as in the
Hmm.
sort of classical way the Buddha taught the jhanas.
Yeah.
That's why the fourth jhana is described as beyond that, beyond craving, right? We're no longer in the realm of craving a pleasant experience, which just turns out to be so much more satisfying. And it's appropriate to call it pleasant in that unworldly kind of way.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, how would you, so that is quite clear and also like evocative, right? I could sort of have or imagine a sort of first person experience of what you're describing. I can envision it. And, and the way that you describe it, you sort of put pleasure forward, like the idea of when you're in a really pleasant experience, what it might be, what it might look like to shift your get interested in the nature of the grasping at it instead of just sort of rolling around in the pleasure. Now,
Right.
if you were to just visit the other end of that polarity and talk about how that same sequence might of sort of wholesome onward leading work might happen when someone is in the midst of unpleasant, whether
Yeah.
it's pain, physical pain, or the unpleasantness of low mood or anxiety or grief or whatever it is that's, yeah, what would that, it's obviously not a I have to not be seduced to just wallow in this pleasure. It's something else. But could you if you'd used displeasure instead of pleasure as the basis for your illustration, what would that look like?
Yeah. And I'm guessing that most of us here tonight have a lot more experience at this end of the spectrum, right? Because we learn so often, if we're paying attention even a little bit, that hating the pain is just that second layer. That's the teaching on the
Yeah.
second dart or the second arrow. A lot of us know that sutta from the Buddha, that discourse.
Yeah.
And and I've had more than my share these last few years being having a serious medical condition. And just recently, a lot of physical pain came online
Mm,
for me just the last month. Um,
sorry.
but yeah, yeah, it's what a powerful teacher. But what it teaches you, you know, it's like, oh yeah, this is like a fire hose of pain. And the only thing, it's like if what what just becomes so clear is that whenever the balance and interest and willingness to be close, whenever it gets distorted or slips into reactivity, it really becomes totally unworkable. When there's hating the pain along with the pain, because it's so easy for that to snowball like a kind of panic attack, you know, where because we hate the pain, there's more pain. So there's then more hatred of the pain,
Hmm.
which means there's more pain. So there's even a greater negative reaction to the painful situation, more of a feeling of an animal being cornered, more of a willingness in terms of how I'm reacting, how I'm relating, to relate in a way that is definitely not helping. You know, it it may create a little semblance that I have some agency, but I'm just adding so much more tension to the moment by my desperation to have control or my desperation to have some meaning or my desperation to blame something or someone for the pain I'm feeling. So we really see, because we slip into this, right? We see the panic attack and how we really, it's just becomes so, we get burnt. So
Mm,
we get driven to either skillfully distract ourselves or to skillfully stay close to it with a way of relating that's wholesome,
mm,
you know, non ill will.
yeah. Yeah. Um, I have certainly had this experience very clearly with respect to physical pain. I think the clearest examples for me have been if I've been on long sits, doing long sits, and my leg starts to hurt or my butt, and it quickly becomes at a certain point it really becomes excruciating. It just like crosses some sort of threshold and skyrockets. And it is amazing how if you're very mindful and not opposed to it and stay close to it, it almost isn't even pain anymore. It's just intensity. Uh, and that as soon as that wobbles,
Yeah,
it's horrible. It's agony.
yeah,
And like it's amazing how quickly it shifts though. Once you're back in, it's not agony anymore. But
that's
it
right. It
really
can
is,
be moment by moment from
yeah,
workable to absolutely not workable.
yeah. But with respect to mental pains of various kinds, like so for instance, in my own experience of anxiety, I it doesn't feel as clean or clear because what happens is there's a feeling of bad feeling, and then that's not as reducible to a particular body sensation for instance, um, might be more ambient, and then the mind is really convinced that there's something it can do about it by messing with it somehow or thinking about it or there's like a the sort of clarity that you described and that I have experienced where you're like, oh, if I'm mindful, this is just sensation. If I let that wobble, suddenly it's horrific. For some reason, that is, for me at least, it's harder to click into with these more nebulous feelings of mental anguish.
Yeah.
Is that a common experience, and why is that? And how does one get that same clarity of, oh, if I'm just with this, if I don't fight this, I think it's so easy to, I don't know, it just feels so easy to slip subtly back into fighting it almost without even realizing that you've done so.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you described it well, John, you know, so you kind of answered the question a little bit because, you know, there is a difference between mental phenomena and physical phenomena. And it has to do with, I mean, obviously there is a blurry line, especially when the concentration deepens, but But we have to, like, if we're going to be aware of a mood, we have to, that part of one's attention that wants to like connect with a thing, that's got to go quiet. So it's got
Mm,
to be like this letting, it's like, how do we sense the general tone of the mind? It's not by directing the attention. It's almost like you're, tasting something that's pervading the space of knowing. And it takes a lot of confidence. It's more subtle work, like to, uh, and it's so, our mood, our way of relating seemingly is so personal that it takes a lot of confidence in the practice to um, observe the mood in a way that isn't being influenced by the mood.
mm,
We use that image a lot about a mirror reflecting whatever's in front of it. So, how does that aspect of the mind that's like a mirror, how can it recognize the mood or the way of relating or the mental pain without being distorted by the meaning that that mental pain is constructing?
mm,
So, and part of what we're realizing is like we have to have a real sense of that mirror like nature of the mind to reflect. And it isn't something, the thing is, if you think or if I think I'm going to be aware of that mental pain, where it's already distorted. So it's like we have to recognize that aspect of the mind without thinking it's me. It is just a natural phenomena of the mind that just reflects. I mean, that's what consciousness is, right? Consciousness isn't putting a spin on anything. It's
mm,
just that capacity of the mind that knows. Oh,
mm,
and now with mindful awareness, we're knowing what is being known, right? So
mhm.
we're using that, but now we're knowing what's being known, and we're trusting that it's a no spin zone, to quote Fox News.
Hmm. Wow, haven't had Fox News quoted in one of these interviews before. That's a first. Hey, it works. It works. And when you talk about the no spin zone, and then after this, let's open it up to Q&A if that's okay with you. I've gotten enough uh, of your time. Would you say that, you know, if when you talked about on the pleasure side of the spectrum, how wanting to just sort of hang out and kind of bask in the pleasure is the sort of maybe like the danger, right? Instead of maintaining that interest in the nature of the suffering, the nature of the experience, would the corresponding phenomenon, the thing that might lead you astray when you're dealing with these sorts of mental forms of displeasure, be the corresponding to the wish to sort of wallow in the pleasure, be the wish to change or escape the pain? Is that
Yeah,
the
or even describe it, like create some meaning that
mm,
explains it to ourselves, because that's also a defensive move. But in
hmm
the pleasure, it's there is a place like when we're that interest does allow the pleasure initially to spread. Like we do want to get interested in joy and sukha, ease, that kind
hmm
of more profound happiness of the heart, that ease of the heart. We do want to really taste it and let it spread. So the non-indulging in it is actually a way to let the healing of pleasure do its job, because it is healing to experience pleasure, just like
mm,
it's healing sometimes with pain, mental pain and physical pain. Like sometimes, whatever the nature of that mental pain or that physical pain is, it may have the capacity to do some unwinding. And the
mm,
way it does its unwinding is when you or I get out of the way. And the way we get out of the way isn't by doing anything. It's about just letting it reveal itself,
mm.
being undefended. But
Yeah.
we can't always do that. We have to be honest with ourselves and try, and that's why like Thich Nhat Hanh had this famous line that I think gets quoted a lot, which is if you just, I mean, this is a paraphrase, unfortunately, but I think it has the right idea. If you keep looking at pain, if that's all you do, it can become an act of self-violence,
Mm,
self-aggression, right? Because if you
yeah.
don't have the capacity to actually be with it, then you're relying on qualities in your way of relating to the pain that are just adding more, planting more seeds for suffering.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point to make, like that insight practice doesn't need to turn into masochism, right? Um and there was a certain point when I was sitting, when I talked about sitting with that pain in my leg, where if I was mindful, it was just sensation. When it wobbled, it was agony. If I'd sat there for another hour, it might have been too much for where my mindfulness was at that point in time. And the wobble would have just been sort of falling over into it. And it would have been like the nature of that almost quasi panic attack phenomenon that you talked about. It's probably skillful to get up at a certain point, right? Or to do something pleasant. And so, yeah, we don't need to just infinitely gaze into the abyss as a way of sort of just flagellating ourselves. I think
Yeah.
that's really important. And doesn't go far enough. You talked a lot about the actual healing and refreshing nature of pleasure, especially I would assume the less worldly pleasures that come from practice, that come from loving kindness and generosity and
Yeah,
so
but it's
forth.
not so different than our worldly pleasures, like if we have
Hmm.
like, because we do this, so let's learn from it. Like, you've been really working hard, staring at your screen, and then you allow yourself to step outside and with your favorite beverage, or often our cat is sitting on our deck. I'll go outside, I'll sit down, and I'll have that sensual experience of petting my cat and him appreciating it and me appreciating his appreciating it, and a little circle of love. And
Hmm.
and so we do this all the time, or even watching a funny video. So really, so-called mundane things or worldly things, but let's notice what that does, like to change the channel and what that does to the heart, the body, and how does it build resilience or does it take it away? Does
Yeah.
it stabilize present moment awareness or does it make the mind more distracted?
Hmm. I really appreciate this, Mark. I think at every stage of this conversation, it's like you're pointing to and helping us avoid potential false binaries, um, or this is good, this is bad dualities that are perhaps too crude.
Yeah.
Um, so I
And
appreciate that.
just a good general thing for us all to integrate, to almost like a little alarm bells should go off if we do notice our mind getting caught, or just fixed views, but this binary thing, especially turning things into good and bad, as
Hmm.
opposed to a moment to moment feeling our way through, learning from our mistakes, so not so tight about doing it right even as we feel our way through our lives moment by moment. Because if we make a wrong turn and we're operating with greed or aversion, the feedback's going to be there if we're feeling our way through. Oh, yeah, I guess this
Yeah,
isn't the way.
yeah. All right. So at this point, I've as much as I've been enjoying the conversation, I could do this forever. I would love to open it up to Q&A.